Though he'd been ill for several years, Freddie Mercury's untimely death came as a shock to even his closest friends. The day he died, the world changed forever, and not just because one of the greatest rock bands of all time had lost its vocalist. On November 23, 1991, fans of Freddie Mercury received some terrible news. Their musical hero had been diagnosed as HIV positive and had AIDS, a fatal autoimmune disease caused by HIV. In a statement, the usually private musician informed his fans, "Following the enormous conjecture in the press over the last 2 weeks, I wish to confirm that I have been tested HIV positive and have AIDS. I felt it correct to keep this information private to date to protect the privacy of those around me." He went on to explain that he'd decided it was finally time to go public with the news, saying, "The time has come now for my friends and fans around the world to know the truth, and I hope that everyone will join with me, my doctors, and all those worldwide in the fight against this terrible disease." As Mercury's statement noted, there had been feverish speculation about the singer's condition, with published photographs showing him looking thin and frail. Though knowledge of HIV and AIDS had been growing among the general public for around a decade by the time of Mercury's disclosure, the news was deeply shocking.
We hid everything, and we avoided questions.
He was the biggest name to be confirmed as having the disease, and the statement also turned attention to Mercury's sexuality, as he had never publicly confirmed he was gay, but also made no effort to hide it. Just 24 hours after Mercury told the world that he was HIV positive and had AIDS, he was on his deathbed at his London home, succumbing to the effects of bronchial pneumonia. With a weakened immune system, the illness took hold of him quickly. News outlets that had only just broken the news of Mercury's diagnosis to his fans now shared that Queen's electrifying frontman was no more.
The rock star Freddie Mercury died last night, the day after he announced that he had AIDS. He was 45.
After months of nothing but rumor and speculation, many, including Mercury's friends, were stunned by the sudden barrage of tragic news stories, and few expected events to move so quickly. Mercury had first been diagnosed with HIV back in 1987, sharing the information only with his inner circle. Though his health was certainly deteriorating, those closest to him, such as Peter Freestone, who helped care for Mercury in his final days, thought that he had more time left after he made his announcement to the world. Freestone, who worked as Mercury's full-time personal assistant from 1980 until his death, has been open about his love for his friend and the job he held for more than a decade. But even he was shocked at Mercury's death, despite having knowledge of his condition. On Ask Phoebe, a blog he wrote for Freddie Mercury's official site, he said, "We all knew it could not be too long, but Freddie's doctor had said that he could be with us for quite a few days longer. I tend to feel that Freddie had decided he had had enough and it was time to go under his own terms." Freestone claims Mercury was aware that his health was declining in the mid-1980s, which is why he decided to be tested for HIV. However, though Mercury went for the test, when his doctor called to give him his diagnosis, he reportedly avoided speaking to him, afraid that he would get the worst news possible. Treatment for HIV was still in its infancy at the time, unlike today, when the condition can be managed with regular medication. Back then, the diagnosis was practically a death sentence. But as his friends and colleagues have made clear, when Mercury became aware of his condition, he showed great resolve. According to Elton John, who was close friends with the Queen singer and who continued to receive gifts from Mercury up until the latter's death, it seemed that Mercury was unafraid of his fate. Indeed, Mercury's bandmates have confirmed that despite his diagnosis and ailing health, he remained focused on his music. In the documentary Queen, Days of Our Lives, guitarist Brian May said that Mercury sat his bandmates down and explained his condition. However, he didn't want to linger on it, and instead planned to dedicate his remaining time to making music as they had always done. For their final work before his death, Mercury shared songwriting credits with his bandmates, which reportedly brought the four men closer than ever before. Despite Freddie Mercury's diagnosis and declining health, Queen did manage to return to the studio and continue to write and record music in the years leading up to his death. With full knowledge of Mercury's condition at the time, some of these works are incredibly moving in retrospect. The Miracle was a defiantly optimistic album, which outlined Mercury's vision of the world. Elsewhere, in These Are the Days of Our Lives, Mercury offers a sign-off to the world. The song's famous music video even sees the legendary showman gazing into the eye of the camera to whisper the words, "I still love you." What has emerged through the testimony of friends is the fact that on November 10, 1991, almost 2 weeks before his death, Mercury had ceased taking medication. On his Ask BB blog, Freestone wrote, "He made all his arrangements. I think he just felt and knew it was his time." Speaking to OK Magazine, his lifelong partner, Mary Austin, also explained, "The quality of his life had changed so dramatically and he was in more pain every day. He was losing his sight. His body became weaker as he suffered mild fits. One day he decided enough was enough and stopped all the medical supplements that were keeping him going." Despite his immense fame, Mercury endeavored to live a private life, especially as his health began to fail him. He made his dislike of interviews and of celebrity culture clear, preferring instead to surround himself with people who made him laugh.
I hate talking to people I don't really know.
Austin lived with Mercury at his London home and was with him until the end of his life. The two had met before Mercury's megastardom, when the singer was 24 and Austin was 19. Mercury described Austin as the woman who would have been his wife, as well as the love of his life. Peter Freestone was also present, with the assistant's role transforming into that of nurse in Mercury's final months. Freestone recalled that Mercury was so weak towards the end of his life that a bodyguard had to carry the singer downstairs so that he could view his art collection. Others continued to visit Mercury, including Dave Clark of the Dave Clark 5, who was reportedly at his fellow musician's bedside when he passed. Sadly, while the history of LGBTQ+ lives and the struggle for equality and acceptance are widely honored today, attitudes towards HIV, AIDS, and homosexuality were quite different in 1991. This was reflected in many of the news stories about Freddie Mercury's illness and death, especially in the notorious British tabloid press. Of course, many news channels were honoring Mercury as a singular artist and performer, and fans were mourning his death from a disease which took so many lives prematurely in the 1980s and 1990s. However, some muckraking journalists and editors were seeking salacious angles from which to approach the story, with articles often spilling over into blatant homophobia. Indeed, at a time when some corners falsely considered HIV a disease that affected only gay men, some people implied that Mercury's death was representative of some moral justice for his promiscuity, an aspect of his life he had not attempted to hide in interviews. Talking to the Pink News, Freddie Mercury, the final act, director James Rogan recalled his horror at some of the headlines he uncovered during the making of the documentary, saying, "There were headlines like, 'I'd shoot my son if he had AIDS,' and ones where they'd catch you unawares and you'd read it and think, 'How did this manage to make it into print? I just can't get my head around it.'" In the weeks following Freddie Mercury's death, many of the same tabloids who previously published candid photos of him looking frail focused on uncovering sensational details of Mercury's life on the London gay scene and accounts of his sex life. Grieving their loss, the other members of Queen were shocked by the treatment their friend and bandmate received in the press, an aspect of his death that they were still angry about years later. Mercury's bandmate Roger Taylor even described the journalists who hounded him as vultures. He told Rolling Stone, "I have never got over his death. None of us have. I think that we all thought that we could come to terms with it quite quickly, but we underestimated the impact his death had on our lives. I still find it difficult to talk about. For those of us left, it is as though Queen was another lifetime entirely." In Queen, Days of Our Lives, Mercury's bandmates explain how they essentially closed ranks and lied to the world about the singer's condition, which was necessary to prevent his life descending into a media circus that would prevent him from spending his last years working. Producer Dan Hall identified the actions of the other members of Queen who stood by their friend and also publicly denounced the vilification of homosexuality after Mercury's death as fine examples of solidarity. As many news reports from the time noted, Mercury's death caused discourse around HIV and AIDS to reach fever pitch. Mercury's diagnosis came fast on the heels of several other news stories around the disease, such as the diagnosis of basketball star Magic Johnson and the death of British theater director Tony Richardson. Mercury's disclosure contained a rallying cry to the world to combat the deadly disease, the consequences of which were written large a day later. Campaigners believed that the tragic death represented a turning point in the history of HIV and AIDS, changed how it was viewed by the public, and contributed to it being taken seriously as a major health crisis. News of Freddie Mercury's death shook his fan base, especially those living in London where his final moments played out. As fans grappled with their feelings over the tragic loss, Mercury's Kensington home seemed the logical destination for one young man who, in front of the cameras of the world's press, left a bunch of roses and a note for the late singer on the front step of his home, Garden Lodge.
Put down to Freddie, one of the greatest rock singers ever lived from one of his loyal fans.
Before long, Mercury's home became a place of pilgrimage for countless fans who came to pay their respects and offer their condolences. It remains a popular destination for Queen fans who find themselves in London. For their part, Mercury's bandmates quickly made it clear that Queen had no intention of disbanding, and within days of the heartbreaking news, began putting together plans for a tribute show dedicated to the singer's memory. The band followed through on their word, with the Freddie Mercury tribute concert taking place the following April at London's Wembley Stadium, the site of Mercury's timeless Live Aid performance. Staged especially for AIDS awareness, the concert saw the band's surviving members performing a 20-hit set with a bevy of A-list guest vocalists, including David Bowie, Mercury's good friend Elton John, and noted rock vocalist Robert Plant of Led Zeppelin and Axl Rose of Guns N' Roses. The show was considered a great success and was key to giving the remaining members the confidence to continue their acclaimed stage show. In the years that followed, Queen joined up with guest vocalists Paul Rodgers and Adam Lambert on a series of acclaimed tours. Freddie Mercury was known for his kindness and generosity, which included countless charitable donations and extravagant gifts for his friends. At the time of his death, his net worth was believed to be in the region of £75 million. In his last will and testament, Mercury left half of his estate to Mary Austin. Austin inherited the Kensington mansion they shared together, as well as the majority of his possessions, such as his art collection. The rest was divided among family members, with friends and romantic partners such as Jim Hutton and Peter Freestone receiving six-figure cash gifts or property. Though Mercury had many friends and lovers throughout his life, none were as close to him as Austin, who supported him in the early days when he was broke and trying to make it as a rock star. She was at his side to the very end and was charged with possession of Mercury's ashes after his death. She has never revealed where she scattered them, in tribute to the very private icon.